This event, organized by Jungianeum and supported by the IAAP, draws inspiration from Jung's book, The Undiscovered Self. In this work, C.G. Jung seeks to address a question that demands renewed attention today. Who or what is hindering the humanity from living peacefully on Earth? This event will help to convey analytical psychology's proposals for today's unhinged world. Our lineup features some of the most esteemed voices in analytical psychology, such as Naomi Ezriel, Paul Bishop, Joseph Cambry, Ilana Locke, Arthur Neiser, Andrew Samuels, Tom Singer, Murray Stein, Ruth Williams, Mary Watkins, and Polly Jung Eisendrath, just to name a few. This is a pro bono initiative. The fee will be fully dedicated to covering conference expenses and supporting the development of current and future Jungianeum initiatives. This will be an exciting event, one you don't want to miss. We have only 20 tickets left before we're sold out, so please sign up. We will have a link to the conference in the chat where you can register. Also, please check out our latest publications. Wolfgang Giegerich Esperanza, which is a translation into Spanish of his latest book, Hope. Jan Wiener's The Therapeutic Relationship, Transference, Countertransference, and the Making of Meaning. And Verena Kass' The Association Experiment in the Therapeutic Practice, which we published for the first time in English. There are more books to come, so please check out our titles on Amazon. We appreciate your support. I want to remind everyone that our episodes are recorded and uploaded on YouTube. So in case you want to share this event with someone who couldn't make it today, or if you want to watch it again, you will be able to find this video on our YouTube channel. So without further ado, I am thrilled and honored to introduce Professor and author Dr. Glen Slater, who will be presenting AI, Posthumanism, and the Collapse of Inner Ecology. Dr. Glen Slater has taught for over 25 years at Pacifica Graduate Institute, where he is the Associate Chair of the Jungian and Archetypal Psychology Program. He has written articles and book chapters for Jungian publications, edited the third volume of James Hillman's uniform edition, Senex and Pouvoir, and co-edited the essay collection, Varieties of Mythic Experience. His research and writing interests concern Jungian film, the psychology of religion, and depth psychology and technology. His book, Jung versus Borg, Finding the Deeply Human in a Posthuman Age, was published in January 2024. In Jung versus Borg, Slater argues that society has entered a post-industrial erosion of inner ecology. Following the collapse of our outer ecological systems, this new existential crisis involves radical changes to modes of perception and processes of thought, leading to a detrimental separation from the deeper ground of psychological life and setting the stage for the volatile possibilities of human-machine hybridization. Alongside the celebrated benefits of information technologies and online life, a growing number of psychosocial symptoms point to this inner split. These symptoms include the omnipresence of misinformation and disinformation, the blurring of lines between actual and virtual experience, and epidemics of anxiety, depression, and loneliness, all of which have been linked to a digital lifestyle. In his presentation, Slater will explore these issues and suggest that a normative, dissociative consciousness and compartmentalized understandings of human nature form a common underlying condition. Slater will also examine how the psychology of C.G. Jung provides both a framework for understanding this condition and a critical counterpoint to contemporary preoccupations with the transformative power of present and future technologies. So Glenn, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Kathleen. Thank you for inviting me, and good to be with you all. So, yes, my talk today is largely based on my book, which was published last year. And so what I want to do is set out my overall perspective, talking about some of the implications of current and pending technologies, and then spend a bit of time amplifying my sense of what I think of as a critical psychosocial collision that's upon us, that's really reflected in the title of the book. And then I'll focus a bit more on AI and posthumanism, the relation between those. And I've titled my book in this sort of deliberately retro sci-fi B-movie-esque way because I want to underscore that there is this major psychosocial collision playing out. And my book is really weaving together three particular areas of interest and concern. The first is that there's a curious dovetailing, I think, between the modern adaptation to science and technology and the rise of depth psychological ideas. And you can go back to the 19th century and look at the kind of coincidence of the so-called discovery of the unconscious with industrialization. But then, of course, Jung underscores this with his critique of the overemphasis on rational thinking and so forth. But it seems to me that we may be entering a new chapter of that relationship, that there is still room to move for depth psychology and ideas of the unconscious, this time around in relationship to digital post-industrial technology. So that's one thing, and I've always been fascinated with this dovetailing of the technological and the psychological. The second stream, though, with the book is the cultural movement that's really become increasingly influential among leading technologists and among some philosophers and cultural commentators. And this is the movement known as posthumanism, which I think it's fair to say has emerged as a kind of secular religion. And we'll get into that. The third stream is really focused on the present moment, our relationship to technology as it stands today, and our adaptation to the digital lifestyle. And the fact that this has come, I think, as most of us has recognized, with considerable psychosocial cost. Amidst all the magic and mastery of online connectivity, smartphones, and apps, there's a corrosive effect on our well-being and on society, and that only appears to be growing. So my book is really attempting to draw a line between where we're at with technology and where many astute and influential people think we're headed, and what a Jungian understanding of the psyche invites us to make of this. And I think an important place to begin is the need to recognize that our essential relationship with machines has undergone a fundamental change. It used to be that we thought of devices as tools that we could pick up and put down again. And while in many respects this may remain literally true, ubiquitous computing, connectivity, information sharing, just the way the internet mediates much of what we do means that both phenomenologically and psychologically, this kind of pick up and put down again posture is no longer the case. Technology now shapes our environment. It defines ways of being. And in concert with this shift, I'd suggest to you that it no longer works to think of innovations as neutral, as things that become only creative or destructive because of how we decide to utilize them. Martin Heidegger referred to this as the instrumental view of technology. And instead of this, we need to think much more about how innovation comes out of certain ways of seeing the world, but then is in turn continually reshaping. Technology itself is reshaping those ways of seeing the world. And this brings us back to that famous, aphorism that began with Thoreau, well, we shape our tools and then our tools shape us. And I think Marshall McLuhan had his version of that he made popular in terms of we're becoming the tools of our tools. Now, there's two aspects to this more immersed understanding of technology. And the first is that instead of thinking of technology as something out there, we need to think of it as something that really begins in the mind. And, as the contemporary writer Brian Arthur, an economist and technology specialist, puts it succinctly, new technologies are constructed mentally before they're constructed physically. And this way of viewing technology goes back actually to the root term techne from the Greeks. And techne was thought of as a way of perceiving that invited crafting, a way of looking upon the world that invites invention, crafting, and so forth. And in my book, I've got a whole chapter called Tinkering, and I suggest that there is in us something like a tinkering instinct. And various people have weighed in on this in different ways, but I just think it's important for us to acknowledge that technology is in itself grounded in something like deep in our nature. And that as I start to then talk about it critically, I think what we should be thinking is not that, we're over here or the psyche's over here and then technology's different, but that technology, as we've lived into it in the modern era, is effectively absolutizing this one particular drive or impulse within us. So that's the first point, that technology begins in the mind. The second is that our whole psychosocial orientation now, including the whole thrust of the global economy, is largely inseparable from the push to innovate and from the idea that innovation, technical thinking can solve all of our problems. And this attitude was named by the writer Morozov as called technological solutionism. And I like that term because it really captures the flavor, I think, of the ethos that's upon us. But the point is, we're now really immersed in what I like to call the technosphere. And at the core of this is, in particular, the online world's eclipse of the offline world, which we don't really have to prove. We just have to look at people walking down the street, right? That that their attention is now on the smartphone. And so even before we get into post-human fantasies of the future, we need to realize there's already something like an effective merger with our digital devices, a kind of functional attachment. But acknowledging that where we're headed appears to be a displacement of actual reality by virtual reality, and a literal merger with our digital devices, a merger that's embraced at the core of posthumanism. Now, sometimes this is referred to as transhumanism. People in the discussion sort of split hairs about the different terms. But I think posthumanism, it's fair to say, is the broader term, but at the and we'll get into this a little more a bit further on, but you know, the core of posthumanism is the idea that we will merge with our technologies and turn into a different species, that we will go beyond the purely human. Now, when we put a Jungian understanding of the psyche beside all of this, it's difficult to avoid seeing the startling degree of detachment from the depths of life, that we're becoming more prone to a compartmentalized and dissociative style of thinking because of this detachment. And that these fragmented states of mind are ominous if, in fact, we're preparing to deliberately intervene in evolutionary processes and reinvent what it means to be human, because obviously we'll just re-engineer ourselves in a way that reflects this kind of detachment and dissociation. So once we acknowledge the level of our immersion in the technosphere, once we consider the collectively evident lack of resistance to each new innovative waves that comes our way, it behooves us, I think, to closely examine the implications of these trends. And it's for all of these reasons that I've chosen to employ the term ecology of mind, borrowed from Gregory Bateson, to frame the main argument of my book. And here I just want to share a passage from the introduction. So as I write, as the ill effects of 20th century industrialism still play out, the ill effects of 21st century post-industrialism are just coming into focus. At the same time, whole economies are turning to data management, and artificial intelligence, AI, has begun taking over human decision-making. Disinformation is spreading, social fabrics are eroding, geopolitical structures are collapsing, and the depths of human nature are becoming harder to both recognize and protect. Abundant information has furthered scientific knowledge, but not human understanding. It has instead left us dazed, confused, and disoriented. Attention, motivation, identity, self-image, and the capacity to reason clearly and imagine deeply are all impacted. Beyond the fragile bonds of globalization and the early promise of the World Wide Web, individuals, communities, and even nations are fragmenting. Now, the advantages of these technologies are impressed upon us at every turn. And the rapid entry of these technologies into every aspect of life is also impacting our ecology of mind. And in my view, there's a vast psychosocial failure that's becoming the most pronounced feature of the digital age, poised to surpass climate disruption as the most pressing crisis of the 21st century. And we've seen that change, most of us, in our lifetimes. If you go back to the mid-90s, there was this great hope around the World Wide Web and the connective possibilities and the understanding of other cultures. And I think it's fair to say that in the last decade, we've seen this whole shadow dimension come in. So we might conclude that just at the time the transformative power of technology has reached a distinct peak, with a certain kind of intelligence and a certain kind of knowledge being more expansive than ever before, there is also a constriction of human consciousness. Almost limitless data sharing and access to information is not generating deeper understanding, greater maturation, certainly not more wisdom. And in many respects, these so-called advances are generating the opposite. Now, another dimension of this problem resulting from the economics of digital technology and the deliberate design rather than the incidental effects of the online world is the commodification of our minds. So here again, I write early in the book, recapitulating last century's approach to the outer environment, today's tech corporations have focused on another natural resource, human interiority. Personal information has become the latest material to be mined, and algorithms have been deployed to manipulate behavior and generate revenue. These developments have turned our habits of mind into the Earth's most valuable commodity. As in the past, these efforts are driven by motivations of power and profit. Unlike the past, such efforts are also altering the very means by which we perceive and understand what is happening to us. And that's where I'm tipping my hat again to this dissociative and compartmentalizing effect, particularly the distraction and the way we've become misinformed and disinformed, and also disembodied in a lot of the ways in which we interact with others and with the world. So it's altering the very means by which we perceive and understand what is happening to us, as we do not yet realize the degree to which the attempt to exploit the outer world is being repeated in the inner world of perception, thought, and emotion. We have entered a particularly critical moment in history. So that's really the broad frame of my argument. So let's now drill down into a few things. One of the difficulties in grasping the idea that there's a collision between the nature of the psyche as a whole and the technosphere is that we generally think of each side as completely open-ended, without structures and dynamics and limitations. And I know that you're here because you likely have a strong sense of the structures and dynamics of the psyche. But most of us, and particularly those in technoscience, fail to see that the technosphere is also ordered in particular ways. Now, there is, for example, what has been called an attention economy, wherein the priority becomes keeping us engaged online, irrespective of the value of the content we're exposed to. And even worse, perhaps, is the incentive that this generates for more polarized and extreme content. So there's that architecture to our online world experience. Another example, though, is the way our personal information is used to tailor that online experience in a way that subtly and not so subtly manipulates our sensibilities and decision making. And this phenomenon has been termed surveillance capitalism by writers like Shoshana Zuboff. And I can't recommend a sizable volume on this topic strongly enough. Now, I think, although he's a somewhat controversial figure, Heidegger offers us a great deal of important insight when it comes to these particular aspects of technology. And it begins with his differentiating ancient and modern forms of technology. As he argues in his pivotal essay, The Question Concerning Technology, whereas ancient technologies were imagined as working alongside nature, the particular character of modern technology, and he's writing about this in the 50s, in the middle of last century, the particular character of modern technology is one of manipulating and frequently exploiting nature. So, in extending this idea of techne as a way of seeing the world, what Heidegger underscores is what he calls the enframing of modern perspective. And this, as I write about in the book, involves the objectification of the world, the turning of the earth into a resource for use and consumption, and viewing things as disposable commodities. Heidegger argues that the enframing of modern technology is a stance that turns the world into what he calls standing reserve, and then human beings into nothing but the orderer of the standing reserve. And you can see in that description the way in which we've become the tools of our tools, that we're, in a sense, joining with the machinery. Again, however, he's writing about this the middle of last century. That is, technology becomes a mechanized, automated, and objectified way of relating to the world. But Heidegger was also able to see where all of this was leading and pointing to a precise position that we find ourselves in today, 75 years later. He writes, and I'm quoting him here, that the modern enframer comes to the point where he himself will have to be taken as standing reserve. Meanwhile, man, precisely as the one so threatened, exalts himself to the posture of Lord of the earth. And in this way, the illusion comes to prevail that everything man encounters exists only insofar as it is his construct. To me, this is a really important way of looking at what is happening to us, because on the one hand, there's this tremendously inflated feeling that comes with having all this information at our fingertips, and now having created artificial intelligence, which is just going to accelerate knowledge in all of these fields and so forth. And at the same time, there is this commodification of ourselves, which I think is hard to deny. So as I write, what Heidegger foresaw has already come to fruition. The virtual world and the attention economy have turned mind and soul into commodities for the online world to objectify and exploit. All is reduced to data, including our sense of self. We may be digital consumers, but it is also we ourselves who are consumed. So whether it's our attention, our comprehension of events, our personal information, even our view of reality, they're all now manipulatable by the tech giants of the world. And we go about our daily lives enjoying virtually unlimited connectivity and access to information. And we're also becoming the raw resources for a global technocracy. So another way to think about this impact on our inner technology and our inner ecology is that, and you can see why I've chosen that term, because of course the Jungian understanding of the psyche is it implies this self-regulating capacity and this compensatory dynamic between conscious and unconscious, and this more synthetic sort of holistic process. But whereas the industrial era commodified the world and the post-industrial era is commodifying us, we ourselves have taken to looking at everything in terms of information and data, including our biology and our psychology. And here we can see the way in which the reductionism fuels commodification. That when we reduce things to data, and this is a really strong view in science now, particularly, overstated by people like Richard Dawkins, who says somewhere that basically everything, including human nature, is just bytes and bytes and bytes of information. And and he adds to that, this is not a metaphor. So there is this extremely reductionistic idea. If we drill down a little bit into both sides of the collision, right? The collision between our inner ecology and this commodification, this what's happening in the technosphere. The ecology of mind on one side, the post-industrial commodification of the mind on the other. We can think of this essentially as a collision between archetypal patterning and algorithmic patterning. Archetypes, of course, being the foundational patterns of psychological life, and algorithms being the rules that direct the function of computers and set the basic strategies of AI in motion. So in this context, let's just recall one of the ways in which Jung describes archetypes. And this is from Collected Works 10, paragraph 53, where he says that archetypes are the hidden foundations of the conscious mind. Or to use another comparison, the roots the psyche has sunk not only into the earth in a narrower sense, but in the world in general. Archetypes are systems of readiness for action and at the same time images and emotions. They are inherited with the brain structure. Indeed, they are its psychic aspect. They represent, on the one hand, a very strong instinctive conservatism, while on the other, they are the most effective means conceivable of instinctive adaptation. And here, of course, he's getting at the way in which our engagement with the archetypes, our symbolic experiences, our working of those patterns in the arts and in literature and so forth, that this is what helps us adapt to the deeper reaches of the psyche. They are thus, he says, and here's the key phrase, essentially the chthonic portion of the psyche, if we may use such an expression. That portion through which the psyche is attached to nature, or in which its links with the earth and the world appears at its most tangible. The psychic influence of the earth and its laws is seen most clearly in these primordial images. Now, when I try to kind of summarize these dynamics, I find myself going back to the image of like a great tree, like a giant oak tree, and of course, with an actual tree, you get branches going wide here, but under the ground, you've got this root system. And it seems to me that what we've come to with our digital age and the nature of today's technosphere is a situation where we've got all these branches just expanding forever, but very little to no root system. That vertical modes of imagination have been corrupted. Vertical understandings of reality in the world are evaporating. Meanwhile, we've got all this incredible information at our fingertips. Now, another way to think about this is that difference between information on the one hand and true understanding on the other, the ability to integrate information into what it means to live and be in the world. So this is an image you might just keep in the back of your minds. So where do AI and posthumanism come in? And we can talk more about this when we're having our discussion, but I'm just going to put a few ideas here on the table. So although the capabilities of AI are startling, and we should have no doubt that this is going to bring about dramatic changes to many, if not most, areas of life, I think it's best to think of it less as an entirely different technology and more as an advancement of computation in general. And because of this, it brings along everything that I've just laid out. Okay. It's not that we're going to make some sudden detour. All of these dimensions of the technosphere that I've just talked about are going to come in behind this AI revolution. And I think the hurdle we need to get over is the illusion of knowledge and even understanding that we've started to project onto this technology, in part because of the humanized interfaces that it frequently uses. But the fact is AI has no understanding of what it says or produces. It merely calculates very, very quickly based on access to an extraordinary amount of data and information what seems to be the most fitting response to an inquiry. But there's no one home. There's no value system or semantic capacity. What it produces has no meaning intrinsically. It has no real connection to the life world. What AI does have, however, is the growing ability to convincingly fabricate all these things, and a growing and very influential tech industry that is collapsing the difference between the fabricated form of intelligence and the depth and complexity of the various forms of human intelligence. That is, the tech world would like us to forget the modifier artificial. In spite of all this, both the tech world and those of us willing to unquestionably adapt to each new stage of innovation are eyeing the development of what is being called artificial general intelligence. That is a human level of computational intelligence that could incorporate capacities like common sense and in the world perception. But here too, however, I believe the same distinction between what's virtual and actual will continue to haunt us, introducing an increasingly blurry line between what derives from what I call the deeply human, rooted in the archetypal, and what comes from computation, shaped by the socio-economic forces of the technosphere. In other words, and I have a section in my book with this title, we're now all in a giant Turing test. You all by now know what that is. It's the idea that you can be blindly interacting with a human over here and an AI over here, and if you cannot tell the difference based on your conversations and inquiries and so forth, the AI has won the Turing test. Some of you may have seen the film Ex Machina, for example, which is a kind of twist on the Turing test that brings us closer into the age of artificial intelligence. But the form of the Turing test will be in is that, of course, rationally, logically, we know we're dealing with an AI, but to what extent will we give ourselves over to that? I mean, already people are developing emotionally fraught relationships with AI, creating AI boyfriends and girlfriends, and you may have read about this. So it's right in the midst of such phenomena and ways of thinking that we find ourselves poised to head down the path of posthumanism. Now, as I mentioned earlier, this has become a kind of tricky term. There's a whole philosophical posthumanism, which has kind of spun out of just the idea that we're living into a time of radical transformation of what defines being human. And for example, that there is a turn to the, away from the anthropocentric sense of being human. And so a blurring of lines between the human and the animal, a blurring of lines between gender relations and so forth. And if you go back to essays, for example, like the seminal essay by Donna Haraway, there's this idea that this new world of being able to re-engineer ourselves will open to all of these great psychosocial advantages. But I think the question that is now upon us 25 years later is really, with this whole dark side of technology, what is to guarantee that with all this flexibility and capacity to re-engineer ourselves, we'll even do so in a way that's conducive to our cultural and social situation. So, irrespective of that broader philosophical post-human discussion, at the core of all kinds of posthumanism is this technological posthumanism, this possibility of merging with our machines, and essentially evolving into a new species, becoming cyborgs, cybernetic organisms. Now, this is all sort of startling and unsettling enough. However, there's a kicker, and that is, beyond artificial general intelligence, there lies what many futurists and technologists are predicting will be an artificial superintelligence. That is, computerized minds that leave humans in the dust. And it's for this reason that it fuels the argument that, well, when artificial general intelligence is developed, we better start merging with it. There will be so little to divide the human mind and the artificial mind, that we better embrace this, direct brain-computer interface that's being developed. Because artificial superintelligence is what's coming down the road. So at first, the advent of such computing capacity will underscore the need for us to try to keep up, evolving into cyborgs and other hybridized entities. Then, though, as is widely imagined in the circles eyeing this prospect, these super intelligent machines will quickly bypass us, building more sophisticated versions of themselves. And you've probably heard the term the singularity, which has been popularized by tech writers like Ray Kurzweil. And that points to this moment where artificial intelligence suddenly begins to go beyond us, and of course, thereby capable of developing more intelligent versions of itself. And there'll be just this exponential explosion. And some people see this playing, some very serious people who have strong track records in predicting technological change. They see all this playing out before the end of the century. Now, it can seem like science fiction, but you've got to consider that posthumanism is a widely embraced movement in Silicon Valley and throughout the tech world, based on a sort of logical extrapolation of where we currently are and what seems to be happening with AI. But if you combine this with the world's capacity for social engineering, for that tech world's capacity for social engineering, you get a sense of the gravity of some of this. So perhaps to cut to the chase, let me just share another passage from my book, trying to underscore some of these points. A responsive virtual assistant or a humanoid robot with access to our data may take us on quite a ride, but they will have little idea of how to encourage deeper character, incubate hidden potential, appreciate pivotal memories, or nurture high aspirations, because no amount of data or algorithmic engineering can recreate the tenderness and torture of childhood, the labyrinth of adolescence, or the dreamscape of who or what we might become. They will not know about joy or suffering, success or failure, warmth or enthusiasm, because whatever these substitute presences will be, or however much data they have on us, they will never find themselves doubled over with physical or emotional pain, shaking with vulnerability, calibrating everything in the face of their mortality, or learning to hold together the limitations of flesh and the ecstasy of being. And if we end up exchanging interpersonal experience and intrapsychic awareness to spend all our time with them, neither will we. Functionally, we will have turned into robotic equivalents, readier to mate with the real thing. So this here, I think, is, I'm pointing to the slippery slope between AI and posthumanism and the way in which they don't just logically come together, but effectively one is grooming us, leading us into the other. So I go on, this is the path before us. The limits and deficits of artificial intelligence are likely to become more apparent, but in the interim, we may well anesthetize ourselves to our fully human nature, losing any sense of the gap between genuine well-being and the techno trip that we're on. At some point, the difference between being in the cyber world with virtual people or intelligences and being in the actual world with real people may not consciously register, because the techno patches we keep applying to our problems will have coalesced into an insensitive, non-human skin. So to me, this is the issue, and this is why our understanding of the psyche is so important. So let me just sort of bring this together, summarize a little bit, and then we'll stop and have a chat. So the picture that's emerging from the technosphere and from our turn to AI in particular is one of putting all our eggs in the basket of computation as the primary means of navigating our existence and shaping the course of civilization. Given the incredible capacities and the evolution of computers, it's an understandable focus. But perhaps the main thing that Jung's psychology does is it sensitizes us to the extreme one-sidedness of this outlook. In the first instance, this concerns the elevation of technoscience over other ways of perceiving and engaging life, particularly in relation to finding meaning and purpose. But in the second instance, even more pressingly, it concerns the possible, if not likely, collapse of psychological life. For if there's one thing we learn from Jung, it's that the neglected dimensions of the psyche develop an underground life and tend to return to our awareness in compulsive and destructive ways. And he himself puts this together in something he wrote back in 1954, where he says, Collected Works 11, paragraph 443, a psychological split runs through vast numbers of individuals. The cause of this development lay principally in the economic and psychological uprootedness of the industrial masses, which in turn was caused by rapid technological advance. This is Jung in the 50s. But technology, it is obvious, is based on a specifically rationalistic differentiation of consciousness, which tends to repress all irrational psychic factors. For example, the archetypes, again, Jung. Hence, there arises in the individual and nation alike an unconscious counterposition, which in time grows strong enough to burst out into open conflict. Now, I think we've got to be thinking to ourselves, this is what we're already seeing. Here we are, seemingly, after 200 to 300 years of enlightenment, scientific thinking, the age of reason, now artificial intelligence, etc., and the irrational is coming back with a vengeance, alongside very unconscious ways of thinking and behaving. So we're today building a rather split, disconnected way of life on top of the 20th century's loss of soul and meaning. And, we can amplify that in all kinds of ways. To me, a great example of this return of the unconscious is in the ways in which the religious function itself has been subsumed by technology. And there's numerous writings on this about, from Noble's book, The Religion of Technology, to Technosis by Davis. But I think what we've got to keep in mind, in contrast to some Jungians' way of thinking about this, is that it's an unconscious religion. Technology is an unconscious religion, hence the compulsiveness of it and the ideological dimensions, and that's a very big difference. The immersive nature of digital technology means our perceptions of reality and rhythms of thought are going to undergo a radical change. Just think about the way digital technology constantly aims to increase the speed of information sharing and stimulation. And this often produces more distraction than understanding. The soul, of course, and the archetypal food that feeds it, requires deeper reflection, presence to oneself. So it's not just the content, but it's the mode of engagement, I think, with technology that's important here. This point has been particularly well amplified by Hillman in an essay called Hermetic Intoxication, which you find now in the Mythic Figures volume, where he suggests that of course the information age, communication and so forth is where we've become intoxicated with Hermes, but we've split off the Hermes Hestian relationship, the principle of the fixed, the hearth, the ability to kind of come down. Again, to me, this is an image of verticality that becomes missing in the manic nature, the horizontality of the online world. And while algorithms and the apps they run may offer a great deal of utility and efficiency, their architecture is ultimately designed to serve the interests of corporations and, in some cases, governments. I just don't see that at some point between now and when we become posthuman that someone's going to flick a switch to sort of change that. Would you at the moment really want to be hardwired to the internet 24/7? I mean, just think of the manipulative possibilities that go with that. And I think this raises the question of how much time we're the ones using the apps and how much time the apps are using us. And thus, whether a posthuman trajectory is essentially a deeply unconscious immersion in the prevailing cultural historical current. In many respects, giant corporations and their policies support the flow of data, and this is transcending geopolitical factors. We're ensconced now in a global technocracy. And when I was using that term in the book, I thought, oh, this is a little radical, but not since Musk is in the White House. It seems telling to me that just in a few months, we have really catapulted into a deeper level of technocracy. So finally, my final comment, if we pull right back, one way of thinking about the human predicament is that we're caught between nature and civilization. And being able to hold the tension between these two great dimensions of existence, finding ways to bridge the two, is perhaps the greatest of all challenges. But collectively, what does this is culture, history, tradition, the arts and humanities, story and ritual. This is where we find the great mediating ideas and images of what it means to be human and to have both animal and spiritual needs. And so somehow I think this is what has to be strengthened, this middle realm of culture, the cultural imagination, that then allows us to see through, to see into what's actually going on. So I just think depth psychology, Jungian depth psychology, can be an important part of this. And that's what I've tried to set out in my book and just give you a little bit of a taste of today. So thanks for your attention. And I didn't see anyone surfing while they were listening. So maybe
Glenn,
we're
thank
taking
you
a
so
pulse.
much.
Yeah. Thank
Thank you
you.
so much for such an important and thought-provoking presentation and timely. I'm going to open up the floor for questions, so you can raise your digital hand or you can put a question in the chat. Anyone? I have a question. It seems like a lot of people are blindly just diving in to AI with this sort of complete trust and excitement, ignoring the caution tape that even the inventors put around this technology. And I'm wondering, what do you think is at the core of this collective drive?
Yeah, it's a fascinating one. But I do think it comes back to this idea of a sort of displacement of the religious function that in Jung has to do with meaning and purpose. It has to do with ultimate significance and having ideas and images of what is of ultimate significance. Um, it also has to do with the sort of displacement that occurred around the religious function, wherein without those collective images of ultimate significance out there, as Jung helped us see, the first thing that happens is that we ourselves take on a God-likeness. And I think technology is largely an extension of that. It's the manifestation in our minds of our own genius. So even though it's taking on this sort of autonomy and this otherness, it's like on some level, wow, look at us. We now are the creators of this extraordinary thing, and we're ready to release that onto the world. So to me, that's a big part of it, and we could drill down into that a little further and sort of say that the loss of an animated sense of the world has, in a lot of very influential people, become this drive to animate the machine, to create life in a sense. But perhaps the background of that is the deadening of the world, the objectification in the first place. So of course technology is magical. There is a sort of enchantment about it that's been also written about. But to me, we have to keep an eye on when those qualities are displaced and coming back unconsciously, we have a fanaticism or we have a compulsive relationship to it. In other words, our relationship with technology, or the religion of technology, if you will, doesn't come with a fitting sense of reverence. It doesn't come with a sense of sacrifice. And I think that's the syndrome of us inhabiting that kind of godlike position in relationship to it. So a few thoughts.
Thank you. Thank you, Glenn. Robert, you have a question? If you could unmute yourself. It's down at the bottom. We can't hear you. So yeah, no, you can unmute yourself. Just go down to the audio
Okay,
at the
can you
bottom.
hear me now?
There you are. Yes.
Okay,
Yeah.
thank you, Glenn. First of all, I want to make the comment that I was reading your book in December and January, and I realized as I was reading it that I thought the author was writing what he would think would be a prophetic work, a little bit sci-fi-ish, and yet every day I realized what I was reading was because what began to unfold in the Trump administration, of course, is one of the key themes in your book is dissociation. And my question for you, or it's a combined comment and question, is it seems to me that we're seeing in Musk and Trump almost, if I can use the word, archetypal examples of dissociation. I mean, I think what is abhorrent to me not only is the policies, but the fact it's obvious that there's not the slightest consideration for the impact on families. I mean, I don't think anyone, and I don't think most of MAGA people would lay off 1,000 people and not consider what the impact might be, even humanly, without setting priorities, without making some kind of at least nod towards the human effects. And so my question to you is, I'm wondering, and this is a desperate hope, that the complete dissociation that we're seeing in Musk and Trump might be a cause to kind of wake people up to this because he is so algorithmic. He's like an algorithm, not a human being. I'll just leave it there.
Well, if we think of him as an algorithm, it's an algorithm that's come out of some shift in the collective, right? I think what's most interesting about Trump is not Trump himself so much as what has allowed someone like Trump to get into this position. And a simple way to think about dissociation is just the not joining the dots. And it's complicated. I know, but surely if the dots were joined in people's minds appropriately, and that we weren't living in this sort of distracted, compartmentalized atmosphere of disinformation and so forth, then Trump would not have been elected. And I think that's the head scratcher for a lot of people around the world, people in other countries I know who actually follow American politics more closely than very large numbers of Americans. And they join the dots. But see, Trump's whole MO is to take advantage of that. This is why he can say one thing one day and the opposite the next day, and it doesn't seem to matter. This is why he can have a vice president who once compared him to Hitler. It doesn't seem to matter. This is why the Republican sycophants around Trump can be so outrageously hypocritical, because in an atmosphere in the technosphere that we have now, there is a lack of what Jonathan Rauch calls the constitution of knowledge. There's a lack of sorting through the information. That's the thing about the horizontality of the information age. It hands everyone a megaphone. And some people with megaphones then get to drown out other people, and then there's nothing organic about what rises to the level of common understanding or knowledge. It's not sorted out. And so this to me is the atmosphere that has given us Trump. And I just want to make a note here that I used to be quite happy leaving politics slightly off to the side. It's always there, but we can't afford to do this now. I mean, this is just outrageous what is taking place, and I think we have to talk about it and relate it to our other concerns every chance we get.
Thank you. Anyone else? Raymond, you just need to unmute yourself. There you go. Thank you.
Thank you very much for a great talk. It seems that, I may have this wrong, posthumanism eliminates the autobiography of Jungian individuation. Machines don't individuate, they just perform at a certain programmed level. Without individuation, no consciousness, no humanity, no centrality of creativity. So it seems as if reductionism kind of has shrunk consciousness to mere computation, and posthumanism is trying to inflate computation to the point that it eliminates consciousness itself.
Yeah, great reflection. What it kind of connects to in me is that a lot of the rhetoric of posthumanism has to do with enhancement and augmentation. There's this idea that we're coming into a new era because we'll be able to enhance our intelligence with this capacity. We'll be able to augment even our physical abilities and so forth. Keep swapping out the misfunctioning organs in our bodies for artificial ones, and so on. But this all has a kind of totally futuristic bent to it. And one of the things that you lose when you lose contact with the archetypal world is a relationship to the past. And I think it's fair to say that individuation is that connection of the past, the present, and the future. What the presence of the past that resides within us, how that shapes our immediate way of being. And then, of course, as Jung talked about, the psyche has a teleological function that has to do with meaning and purpose, and perhaps ultimately we could say sort of human destiny. But if we start exchanging all of that for what is more practical, efficient, utilitarian, and so forth, in order to become more adapted to a technosphere, yes, I mean, the idea of individuation just really goes out the window.
Thank you. Thank you, Raymond. You know, there is a part of society that sees AI as something that is positive, obviously, right? And that it's going to be like a container of all the information, so we're never going to have to search for it. It's all going to be there. Therefore, we have the opportunity to become more conscious, to work on ourselves, to work on our own psyche. And there are many people that also believe that it has the ability to become conscious, and dare I say then become sacred. So what do you think about this parallel thoughts? Because what we're talking about today obviously is all the, the negative aspects, or what it could become and what could happen to humanity. But there are many that believe the opposite, in a more spiritual aspect, like you were saying when you were talking about religion. But what are your thoughts on that?
Well, there's a lot in there, but like, let me comment on two things. The promise of modern technology has always been to free us up to do other great things, right?
Mm-hmm.
And it seems that we're more and more filled with attending to our devices, answering our emails. Like, where does all this spare time go? We in many professions, we work twice as hard as we used to, and so forth. So we've got to, check those promises with the realities of things. In terms of AI and consciousness, I have a whole chapter in my book on consciousness. And I think the hopeful thing here is that there's now a lot of interest in consciousness. What is it, for example? But I think the more fruitful approach would be to look at what is it that generates and expands consciousness. And there's something oxymoronic about a conscious machine, simply because if you look at the conditions under which consciousness is created, they all have to do with embodiment and relationship. The way we come into the world, start relating to parents, for example, the way we expand consciousness by having encounters with otherness and so on. The way we're forced to become conscious because we're mortal and we want to be able to, consciously make our way through the world, et cetera, et cetera. So maybe, I mean, the time of AI, along the lines of what I talked about, fabricating consciousness, that's going to be quite soon, if it's not here already. If there's a sort of threshold consciousness developed by AI, it's going to be altogether different from human consciousness because of that lack of embodiedness, because of that lack of mortality. I mean, just think about it. Where is an AI? It doesn't have any in the world boundaried sense of self, for example, because it's the basis of it is everywhere. It's drawing on everything from the internet. So what would consciousness possibly be? And in terms of just general terms of the hope we hold for AI, there's no doubt, like many of these massive technological developments, scientific breakthroughs, medical breakthroughs, there's a lot of good stuff that's going to come from this. But it's a little like psychotropic medication, which is marvelous to kind of get people over the hurdle and so forth. But the whole ethos around it that tells us, our brains are just machines, and that when we're depressed, we have a chemical imbalance, and that whole reductive mindset, that's what the problem is. And I think that's what the problem's going to be with AI, that it's going to convince us that our minds are also just computers. And therefore there's a kind of diminishment that comes from that. So anyway, a few thoughts.
No, great. Thank you. Thank you, Glenn. Tina, you have a question?
Yes, hello. Maybe more of a comment about embodiment. I think now the most of research in the field of AI is actually going into this direction. What happened is that all the knowledge what is digitalized, what is actually written, was put into these machines. So there is not much more information we can put in because it's all the corpus of humankind, let's say, written. But now the developers saw, now we have to go into embodiment. Now we have to go into seeing things, for instance, because neurologically there is much more information in seeing things than in, the speech is just the last, it's like the secondary process of thinking. But everything else is happening on more deeper intuitive level, and this is now the main focus of research, what is happening at the moment. So no one knows how this will really look, but we cannot say, it looks like this, so it will look like this in some years. No, it might be totally different. It might be much more human maybe than we imagine. But here are some fundamental questions we don't have answers. And first is consciousness. What is it? We still have no idea, actually, we don't know where is it. Is it something that emerges through the working of neural networks? In this case, it could emerge. Or is it something else? Could it be connected to quantum processes? We don't know. And this is also coming in technology. So it's super hard to predict, because probably the development will go, it's hard to imagine. The AI might become much more similar to us than we think, that it won't lack all this. And another problem is emotions at the moment. Also, AI can recognize emotions, can understand emotions, but does not feel it, because it's connected to the body again, And again, we don't really know what emotions are at the end of the day. So it's really, it's hard to predict where things will go, because already what emerged wasn't developed. This is also another thing.
Notice what you keep saying is we don't know what things are.
Yes.
And we keep looking for mechanistic explanations of what things are. And I think it's better for us to spend time looking at the phenomenology of these things. Like, what is it? What does it mean to be an emotional being? What does it mean to have feeling toned images, which are sort of in between body and mind? To have a genuine imagination, and therefore to truly understand poetry, because you live as a vulnerable being in an embodied world. See, to me, I think you're right about we can't predict where this is going, but it's clear. The clearest thing is that we're on the verge of such major changes that unless human consciousness increases and expands, unless we have more self-understanding, then we're likely to really mess this up. This is what Yuval Harari says in his book Homo Deus. where he argues that we're now entering the third stage of history. The first stage, we turned to the gods because they were the authorities. The second stage, we turned to ourselves because there was no authority higher than human awareness and decision making. But now he argues we're entering the age of the algorithm, where we're going to trust the AI more than ourselves. And the danger of that, as he argues, is that we will become more unconscious even if AI becomes more intelligent and consciousness. And that's the worst thing of all. So I think it's really important for us at the same time to be focused on what's going on with AI and what its possibilities are, to be looking at what's going on with the psyche. If there's a diminishment of our psychological capacities at the same time as these advances, that's not a great recipe for things.
Thank you, Glenn. I think we have time for a couple more questions. Prashant, there you are.
Thank you for the
Hello.
opportunity for the question.
course.
So Professor Slater, thank you so much for this lovely exposition of what AI has been doing and what it is potential of doing for us as humanity. And I just wanted to understand a few things here. To begin with, technology is really here to stay. Now, this is not something new that we are speaking about. Ever since we, as much as we go back past in the history, we can say things have always evolved in every way. And so AI as well, the way there was the internet revolution, and so now we have AI, and then there is Industry 4.0. So, all these things are out here to stay, and they're only going to get, better or worse the way as it stands. So I was wondering, do you think, in the face of it, the solution to this, what could that be? Could it be, in the sense of having better education, as you mentioned yourself, that, we don't understand, people don't quite understand how psyche works and what ill effects the artificial intelligence could do to the natural psyche. So to keep it short, just to understand that, what is there at stake? What are the ill effects in the longer run? If people could somehow be made aware of, these core questions. So
Yeah.
probably that could be a way to mitigate, because again, technology is not to go anywhere. So
Right.
yeah, I'll
Thank you. And I agree with you. Technology is not going to go away. Computers are not going to go away. AI is not going to go away. The real question is, how do we live with these things, and how do we perhaps shepherd further developments in a more conscious way? And I think that begins with some of what I was talking about, which is trying to drill down into the nature of technology and understanding that it's not this neutral thing. It's not just an extension of scientific discovery. It's not just the application of knowledge. It has a certain posture towards the world, this objectifying, manipulative posture, rather than working with nature as a kind of co-intelligence, if you like. And I think there's a psychological version of that too, which is our capacity to tap into the deeper intelligence of our inner nature, which is what Jungian psychology is all about. So in my book, I suggest that the way through this is a more co-creative paradigm where we're guided by the wisdom and intelligence of nature, alongside all of this technological power and capacity, but for that to happen, I think we have to awaken to what technology is actually doing to our capacity to our well-being, our capacity to relate to others in, you know, in empathic ways, et cetera, et cetera. That's where the shift in consciousness, I think, has to occur right now. So I'm just watching the time, but I see Jeff has a
We have
question.
one more. Yeah, Jeff, we have time for one more question. Jeff, thank you.
I'll try and be pretty quick. I was just curious about this notion of AI, being fundamentally different from us, and that we're capable of, for many reasons, but one of which is that we're capable of creating meaning. AI is not capable of creating meaning. And I know that there's already warnings on AI generated content that we see on the internet that tells us this is something that was created by AI. And it's sort of reminiscent for me of GMO foods in that way. It's like the initiative to label GMO foods, like this in our inability to agree on whether or not that's important to actually make this distinction between something being GMO, genetically modified. And kind of reminiscent of that argument for me. And I'm wondering, is that an accurate metaphor, or is there some sort of metaphor to be made in between AI and GMO foods in that way? And is it important in your mind to maintain a distinction between what actually is AI and what is not AI, as the line will increasingly become more blurred? And how important is that? I hesitate to operate under the illusion that there's just one solution to the problem of becoming dissociated, like you talk about in your book. But I'm curious, is it in so much as there's some sort of antidote? Does maintaining the distinction between AI and humans, would that be important in a way as a sort of antidote to it? And to what extent is reconnecting with meaning part of that as well?
Yeah, I think as a practical step, that would make sense for us to be clear about what's generated by AI and what's not, particularly because of the manipulative possibilities of AI use going forward. But the question of meaning, I mean, just let me use an analogy, which is, what's the meaning of Moby Dick? And can you get the meaning of Moby Dick when you let the AI read it and give you its synopsis and so forth? I don't think so. I was stunned to read something in the past week where someone was talking about their high school reading assignments, and they didn't get to read any novels whatsoever, only synopses and summaries of novels and passages. And we don't need to go into the reasons why that is, but it has to do with the adaptation to the technosphere. But what's the problem with that is that you don't get to sit and reflect and experience as you read through a great piece of literature and discern the meaning of that in relationship to your life. That's where meaning comes from, in relationship to your life. So that's the kind of meaning that AI cannot generate, and I don't think it can generate it for us ultimately either. To me, that would be one example. So anyway, thank you.
Thank you, Glenn. Thank you for such a fascinating presentation, and thank you everyone for such a stimulating discussion. We have a link to Glenn's book in the chat. Once again, Jungianum's first online conference, Democracy on the Couch, In Search for the Forgotten Self, will be on May 24th and 25th, so please register. Also, please join us for our next Psychosocial Wednesdays on April 16th. where we will have with us Betty Sue Flowers, who will be presenting U.S. Democracy in Transition. So thank you, everyone. Thank you, Glenn. Thanks for coming today.
Thanks,
Take good
thanks.
care.
I finally caved and created a website. So if you want to look
Okay,
anything about me, it's glenslater.com, which should be easy to remember.
that's great. That's great.
But thanks, everyone.
Thank you, everyone. Take good care. Bye.
Bye.